Hello and thank you for joining us here at the First Alert Desk. I'm Maria Moreau. Halloween is almost here and a lot of us are starting our festivities a little early, as soon as this weekend. So we want to bring an important conversation to your attention, and that is making sure that everybody can have a wonderful celebration of Halloween, including children that might be on the autism spectrum. And we are actually talking to Samantha Sardone. She's a board-certified behavior analyst for Hopebridge Autism Therapy Center. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. So I thought this would be an important conversation to have because it's not something we're typically thinking about as we're getting our costumes together and talking to our friends about going out and collecting all the candy. But it is important to make sure that Halloween can be an inclusive time for everybody, including people that experience sensory issues. So tell me first, what is autism?
Autism is a neurological disorder that impacts a variety of individuals, and kind of the core deficits that someone on the autism spectrum may experience would be communication challenges, social interaction deficits, as well as different adaptive skills that they might be working on through developmental delays that they may have. So all of these things combined would make for an interesting Halloween experience if those caregivers don't come prepared, but we want to equip them with all the tools and strategies to be able to have a successful and memorable Halloween that's going to, be really impactful for them and their neighbors, to be sensitive to all of those sensory challenges that they may have, and the way in which they may communicate and interpret the world a little bit differently.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little to the parents who possibly have children with autism or may have autism themselves. And then I also want to talk to those out there who don't and how they can be more supportive and inclusive. So let's start with parents who want to give their child the experience of Halloween. It's often a time where kids can pretend and candy collect and really be free and among their friends. But
Yes.
also we talk about the amount of sensory overload that can happen between masked costumes and loud noises and the amount of social interaction that parents can't often predict. So let's say that I'm a parent, this is going to be my first time taking my child out into the neighborhood for Halloween. What should I keep in mind and what conversations can I have with my child?
Oh, these are great questions. And I love that we're thinking ahead with Halloween being a few days in advance. So I would say first and foremost, practice is going to be the most important tip. It is a very different experience and something that only happens one time per year. And our individuals with autism have a difficult time coping and handling change. And this is a big change, right? Something we don't do every single day. So being prepared with practice opportunities, whether that be engaging in it with practice at home or with family members, or even video modeling is a cool tip. So having siblings model what that would look like by knocking on the door, greeting at the door, and then receiving the candy from the bucket, and practicing those opportunities multiple times. Also, just having a plan of how you're going to navigate the neighborhood and maybe keeping it a little bit simple, maybe staying close to home and buddying up with some close neighbors or friends to make the experience really enjoyable for all. Our individuals with autism may need some extra breaks. So even the suggestion of maybe parking a car down the road so that we can walk towards the car and maybe even take a break in the car is another tip that might benefit some families.
And another thing to consider are teens with autism who might want to take this time to just go hang out with their friends and they don't necessarily want their parents there. What kind of conversation can be had with a teen?
Oh, I think that that's great. So just alternative options, right? So maybe trick-or-treating door by door is not their thing, but there's alternative ways to celebrate the holiday, whether that be a movie night with friends or just being able to hang out and play games, things like that is with dress-up costumes is also a totally appropriate way to be able to do maybe a less socially impactful experience with Halloween, but do it kind of more on their terms, something that they're going to feel comfortable and confident with.
That's a good point to take in, not just for parents of children with autism, but really any child that might just not want to go out trick-or-treating the traditional way. I know
Yeah.
I myself have valued movie nights with my friends a lot more than going out and knocking on doors of strangers. So I can definitely take some tips from that. But let's talk a little bit about the friends of people with autism, how they can
Mhm.
support them. Let's say they haven't experienced autism themselves, but they want to help offer an inclusive experience. What steps can they take?
Well, something really cool that we're seeing a lot in our stores right now is different colored buckets. So if you happen to see a blue bucket walk up to your door, chances are it's being held by an individual with autism. And so just being sensitive to the fact that that experience at that interaction at that door at that time may be a little bit different for all involved, and just being patient and really gracious towards that individual. They may communicate in a different way. They may have some impulsivities with grabbing at the bucket or even picking too many candies. So I would just encourage our neighbors to extend grace to those individuals who may have a more difficult time, and just be mindful that they may not have the means to say please or thank you, or even the phrase trick or treat. Some individuals might have a communication device or may communicate with visuals. And so just being prepared for kind of anything that may come by surprise, but extending kindness and compassion towards that individual and that family. Again, it may evoke some irritability or just some a little bit of distress, and so just being patient and kind towards that interaction. I know when I was growing up, it was always a requirement at every door that you use manners and all of those things, but just being really understanding that that may not come as naturally to our individuals with autism, but in order for them to be able to participate and still have a great time, we kind of have to meet them halfway.
I think when we talk about autism, a lot of people think of the autism spectrum. And that's important to keep in mind because somebody with autism doesn't look like another person with autism or doesn't respond in the same way. What should somebody do to really gauge the comfort level of someone with autism?
I love that question. I think for some of our littles, just getting down on their level, kind of crouching down and making the experience a little bit less intimidating is key. Also, sometimes kiddos might have fears or phobias, or like we were saying earlier, being sensitive to loud noises and sounds. And so, let's say you've decorated your porch with a lot of overstimulating things, which we love and encourage. I love decorated houses, right? But maybe that individual will have a harder time approaching the door. So you might be prepared to kind of step off the threshold of the porch and bring the candy bucket to them. They may even have a harder time and want to stay in a wagon, perhaps down by the sidewalk. And so just being willing and able to, again, meet them halfway in that space, I think is really key, so that they can still have a memorable experience and attain that candy. Now, other times boundaries might be difficult, or different diets that kiddos might be on. So maybe even having alternatives of little sensory items from the dollar store. Kids love squishies, or even little light up bracelets. Anything cheap and fun would be totally appropriate to have as alternatives to your candy bucket.
And probably better than the amount of candy they will definitely be taking home and trying to eat in one night, possibly.
Oh, yes.
We talk about, the things we can do to support children and teens with autism, but we don't always talk about what we shouldn't do. Are there things that people should steer clear of?
Yeah, I think sometimes we just need to make sure. One of my favorite words in the autism community is assent, right? And so making sure that kiddos feel safe and comfortable is the biggest thing. So they may not want to touch or engage in any physical touch. So I would definitely keep a safe distance and make sure that we're not being too intrusive, right? Also, sometimes over talking or engaging in too much verbal stimulation is likely to overwhelm them. So keeping our communication short and concise and very calm and patient is going to also help them have a really pleasant experience as well.
I want to thank you so much, Samantha, for all of these important insights and things to keep in mind as we enter this weekend and into Halloween. I want to make sure we didn't leave anything out. Is there just a big overall message you want people to understand as they're going into Halloween about making sure that they are creating that safe and welcoming space for everybody?
Well, I just think that all kids deserve, a meaningful and memorable Halloween. And so just keeping in mind that every single kiddo that comes to your door on Halloween, um, might be experiencing some form of a challenge that day. And so just being sensitive, kind, and compassionate towards all of the kiddos that are going to greet you at the door. Also, I have to give a tip or I guess a plug from my organization. We have a free Halloween guide on our website. It's 15 pages and is accessible with tons of tips, even a social story that parents can use, visual supports that can be used for practice opportunities. So I encourage any families and or neighbors who are interested to log on to hopebridge.com and download our free 15-page guide for Halloween this year.
And that's so helpful to just have on hand. We're going to have a full link to that on our website, along with this full interview and more tips you can use on atlantanewsfirst.com. Make sure you check it out. Samantha, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It's been awesome. Have a great weekend.